and thank you for joining us today for the Potential Applicant Webinar, Cancer Prevention Clinical Trials Network, CP-CTNet Sites. My name is Jennifer Leidenberger, and I will be your WebEx host. Before we begin to introducing our speaker for today, I'd like to make a few comments before we get started. All have been muted upon entry and will remain muted for the duration of the webinar. Please submit your questions throughout the presentation in Q&A or chat panel and select all panelists from the drop-down. We have them on your behalf during the Q&A portion of the webinar. Specific aims will not be addressed during the webinar. If you need to view live closed captioning, please refer to the Media Viewer panel. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted online in the near future. And I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Eva Szabo.
Great. So thank you, Jennifer. And let me begin by thanking everybody who's on this webinar, and we will do our best to answer all your questions. So the outline of what we're going to do over the next hour is to go over the background and the overview of the RFA, and then have a question and answer session. We will not answer questions about your specific aims or individual grant applications, but we will answer questions that pertain to everybody. And I thank those who have sent them in already. So, development of preventive agents requires multiple aspects. It requires biology behind the process, preclinical and toxicology studies. It requires a robust early phase clinical trials program to pick out those agents and strategies that are safe and potentially effective. And then there's the phase 3 clinical testing to develop, to identify actually effective agents, which will hopefully eventually go into general usage. Division of Cancer Prevention, or DCP, has several drug development programs that address these critical components of the drug development process. There is the preclinical program known as Prevent, which identifies the biologic rationale, molecular targets, and establishes the preclinical efficacy and develops the toxicology package. There is the clinical program that is the focus of this RFA that forms the early phase clinical program that performs the preliminary efficacy and safety studies, phase 0 through 2 clinical trials. And there is the robust ENCORE program, which performs the phase 3 studies. The Cancer Prevention Clinical Trials Network is the focus of this funding announcement, is aimed to qualify cancer preventive agents for further clinical development via the conduct of phase 0, 1, and 2 clinical trials. So the goal is to assess preliminary efficacy and safety. But because it's a science in development and a clinical trials program in development, we are also looking to optimize clinical trial designs and to use novel designs that can answer the appropriate questions, to develop surrogate and intermediate endpoint biomarkers, to novel imaging technologies that can help in assessing efficacy, and to develop further insights into the mechanisms of cancer prevention by the agents and strategies that are being studied. The program, and DCP has had such a program since the 1990s, consists of 5 main contractors who have developed a consortium of multiple member sites, over 100 member sites at the current time, going to be replaced by the CP-CTNet, which will be a network that will consist of only 5 cooperative agreements, UG1 funded CP-CTNet sites. These consist of the lead academic organizations that will submit the applications together with their affiliated organizations. There will also be a U24 funded data management, auditing, and coordinating center. And there will be a subsequent webinar addressing the DMACC. So types of studies that will be performed by this network include phase 0 microdosing and biomarker modulation studies, phase 1 pharmacokinetic and safety dose establishment trials, and phase 2 preliminary efficacy trials, which may or may not be placebo-controlled. And there is a whole variety of these kinds of studies, ranging from from trials that have pre-malignancy endpoints that require pre- and post-biopsies or screening to identify individuals who have such lesions, studies that look at molecular endpoints, surgical or window of opportunity trials, and others. The areas of emphasis that DCP has verbalized in our previous presentation to the NCI Board of Scientific Advisors include new areas of scientific study, such as immunoprevention, strategies to optimize risk and benefit so that we can actually deliver drugs that are effective in a manner that will allow the appropriate individuals to take them effectively. So these are regional drug delivery approaches, alternative dosing schedules such as intermittent doses, combinations of agents, and also interested in drugs or strategies that affect multiple chronic diseases, so repurposing old drugs for prevention. Now, these areas of interest should not be viewed as limiting to any proposed application, so what you propose does not have to fall into these areas of emphasis. The structure of the new program is as follows. It will consist of two main components. The academic organizations, together with their network members, the affiliated organizations, will develop study ideas, conduct the trials, perform all the tasks and the appropriate statistical, enrollment, fiscal management issues. There will be a coordinating center. That will be one grant, which will house the central data management base of record and will perform data management, auditing of the sites, and the general clinical operations support. DC will continue to be involved. This is a cooperative agreement, generating study ideas, reviewing the letters of intent and protocols that are submitted, serving as IND sponsor, help with drug distribution, and oversight and compliance. Key changes from our previous program are that this is now going to be a cooperative agreement as opposed to a contract with centralized coordination afforded by the Data Management and Auditing and Coordinating Center. One data management system which will allow much easier to the clinical trials by multiple members of this entire network. And there will be limited restricted funds for interconsortium and high priority new studies, which I will describe a little bit later. So this webinar is focusing on the UD1 funded CP-CTNet sites. And the roles of these sites will be to design, perform, and report the results of early phase cancer prevention clinical trials. The academic organization, LAO, will serve as the main infrastructure to support the performance of these trials. It constitutes a network of the affiliated organizations, or AOs, to perform the trials. It will provide administrative support and oversight to trial performance by the AOs, and the AOs will also perform their own clinical trials, either alone or in conjunction with their AOs. The clinical trial ideas and trial performance can arise at the LAO, at an AO, or any combination thereof. And LAOs and the AOs may participate in trials arising at their CP-CTNet site, as well as those that arise from other CP-CTNet sites. So what we're trying to get across is much more of a network approach with the whole group working together, which was a little bit harder for us to do in our previous contract-funded clinical trials program. The DMACC will house the database of record, audit the sites, and provide coordination across the CP-CTNet sites. Our requirements will be to develop 1 to 3 new clinical trials per year. The minimum enrollment should be 10 to 40 participants per year, with 10 participants in year 1 and 40 more participants in years 2 to 5. The sites will obviously need to evaluate the translational endpoints in the biospecimens obtained from the participants, and they will need to collect, process, and store these biospecimens for potential future use as well. We expect the evaluation of novel technologies, whether they're imaging, blood-based, et cetera, for assessing the effects of interventions, so that we actually have innovative clinical trials which will answer the questions as efficiently as possible. The aims to be studied will be announced twice yearly via NCI solicitations for letters of intent, or LOIs, and NCI will review and approve selected LOIs for further development. These may be developed by individual CP-CTNet sites, jointly by more than one site. This is expected to also propose unsolicited LOIs using agents or interventions that are available to their investigators. And RFA actually requests 2 sample letters of intent using 2 different agents in 2 different target organs. The LOIs, this is an attachment 2. These LOIs are meant to illustrate the site's approach and capabilities. They may or may not be approved for full protocol development. And when we say agent, we mean an intervention that could be a drug, a vaccine, another immune intervention, an ablative modality such as a surgical approach, laser, etc. So we have a wide definition of what agent is, but it's meant to be an intervention. There are trans-network activities that include interactions, obviously, with the DMACC and participation in trans-network clinical trials and high-priority ancillary studies. And it is for this reason that we have reserved restricted funds of $100,000 per year in years 2 through 5 of the program. There's a steering committee, which will include representatives of the CP-CTNet awardees, both the U1 and G1s and U24, along with NCI participation, which will be expected to form a self-governing body for the network. Now, I will provide additional support, which is beyond the scope of the 2 CP-CTNet funding opportunity announcements. These include regulatory support, which includes IND applications and FDA reporting, agent acquisition, packaging, and distribution via the NCI, the DCP biorepository, a central institutional review board. Actually, CIRB review is going to be mandatory. And the DCP Protocol Information Office will receive all the protocols, coordinate review and approval process, and manage all the study documents. The mechanism for this grant is a UG1, a Clinical Research Cooperative Agreement, single project, clinical trial required. Clinical research has a strict NCI definition, which is cited there. And if it involves direct interactions with the human subjects to study mechanisms of human disease, therapeutic interventions, clinical trials, or development of new technologies. Cooperative agreement means that after the award, NCI scientific or program staff will assist, guide, coordinate, or participate in project activities. The single project refers to all of the CP-CTNet activities. You're probably thinking, but we're going to do multiple clinical trials. It is considered overall a single project. And clinical trial required indicates that these grants include the conduct of studies that meet the NIH clinical trials definition. Studies will be approved later, delayed onset. Reminders, the application budgets are limited to $625,000 direct cost for year 1, $1.5 million direct cost years 2 through 5. Please request a 5-year project period. That's what we have been approved to allow. A letter of intent, and I don't mean the letters of intent in attachment 2, but letter of intent that you intend to apply to this funding announcement, requested, but it is not required. It does help us plan for the applications and the resources needed. Must follow the guidelines. Cannot say that often enough. please read the RFA and make sure that you understand all aspects of it. I have a couple of links there to the SF424 R&R application guide. It is very helpful. And of course, the RFA itself. And I want to emphasize that the PPIs on this application must not be named as senior key personnel or other significant contributors on the applications for the companion fund announcement for the DMACC, which is RFA CA030, and vice versa. The terms for the applications. So the RFA was released September 14th, 2018. Letters of intent are due, although not required, by October 15th, 2018. The actual applications are due on November 15th, 2018, and there are no late applications allowed. Scientific merit will occur at some point in the late winter, February, March, April 2019, and the award should be made by August 2019. So the anticipated period of performance will be hopefully, from August 1st, 2019 to July 31st, 2024. Listing here a few additional resources regarding NIH grants and funding, the SF424 instructions. We have CP-CTNet Site for potential applicants, which has a lot of information about the DCP clinical trials program. The recorded RFA webinars, this one and the one that will be done now for the DMACC, as well as frequently asked questions or FAQs, will be posted on this CP-CTNet site in the very near future, and the FAQs will be updated as new questions are received. And we have a staff email, cpctnet@mail.nih.gov, and I encourage you to please ask us questions, any questions you may have. At this point, we will move into the question and answer period. Jennifer, you want to?
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Szabo. I'd like to jump into questions from our audience, as well as those submitted leading up to this webinar. As a reminder, you can submit your questions at any time using the Q&A or chat panel, and select all panelists. We'll turn it over to Brandy.
Actually, we're going to turn it over to me for a second because many of you very kindly sent us questions. And so while the rest of you are thinking of questions, I'm going to go down the list, and warning, there are 26 right now. The first question, DP has previously verbalized various focus areas for the early phase clinical trials program. Is there still interest from the DCP in these areas? And I refer to this in the presentation, the focus areas that have been verbalized at the Board of Scientific Advisors presentation. For instance, prevention, optimizing risk-benefit, topical and regional approaches are still of interest, but they should not be seen as limiting to the application you might propose. Question 2, can we discuss potential candidate agents with DCP staff prior to application submission? No. Number 3. It's a reasonable question because in the past we have asked people to discuss agents with us, but this is an open competition. Number 3, if we have additional detail that we think would be useful in our application, can we add appendices? Actually, NIH has very clear guidelines on this. There is a notice, not OD 17098, which will be in the FAQs, the actual website, which states that only limited information is allowed to be submitted in the appendices. Per this, beginning with the application submitted to the NIH AHRQ or NIOSH for due dates or after January 25th, 2018, so include this time period, the only allowable appendix materials are, number 1, blank data collection forms, blank survey forms, and blank questionnaire forms or screenshots thereof. 2, simple list interview questions. Number 3, blank informed consent assent forms. And number 4, other items only if they are specified in the FOA as allowable appendix materials. Application is submitted with appendix materials that are not in compliance with this policy, it will be withdrawn as non-compliant. So in other words, the answer is no. Question 4, can you provide any additional information about the multiple delayed onset question of the application? Yes, we have a website for this, and that will be posted in the FAQs. I'm going to read all those letters right now. 5, are the attachments for the research strategy section included in the 30-page limit? No. The 30-page limit refers to the research strategy. Attachments are separate. They are the attachments. 6, affiliated organizations compete with multiple LAOs. The answer is yes. Any AO can be part of multiple UG1 applications. AO can, in other words, associate with multiple LAOs. The things that the AO would bring to each UG1 application should be outlined in each of those applications. Number 7, is the response restricted fund of $100,000 included in the maximum budget of $1.25 million in direct costs, or in addition to it, and does it require justification? So the answer is yes. The rapid response restricted funds are part of the total budget in years 2 through 5, and they do not require justification because you're not proposing anything just yet. Are supplemental fund requests, for instance, for biomarkers possible, or are these costs, the endpoint analyses, supposed to be estimated as part of the $1.25 million in direct costs? So the primary endpoints and limited secondary endpoint analyses are part of the direct cost, the $1.25 million per year, such that you can tell what the clinical trials actually show, that the results are interpretable. There may be opportunities in the future for additional secondary biomarker studies, but the estimated costs in the current applications must cover the costs that are necessary to interpret the results of the clinical trials. Under personnel costs, what is by lead site coordinators is at each AO per trial. For the AO only, it is only the LAO. What kind of network-wide administrative support will the DMACC provide? Please give examples, differentiate from all aspects of study operations which are handled by the LAO. So the DMACC will schedule and facilitate network-wide meetings for both the leadership and all staff. It will ensure use of standardized clinical common data elements, for instance, for similar elements across trials. It will create network-wide standard operating procedures. The CP-CTNet Sites will still be responsible for study-specific calls. So the sites will deal with study-specific issues, whereas the DMACC will have oversight of network-wide activities. 11, what is meant by the recruitment efforts done by DMACC? Is this on a trial-specific basis, or will these be overall prevention recruitment materials? In other words, will the DMACC be developing, for example, trial-specific recruitment brochures? The DMACC will be responsible for overall cross-network recruitment efforts, but the trial-specific customization of materials will be a responsibility of the CP-CTNet Sites. 12 deals with the goal and scope. Conduct trials with single or combinations of other modalities. What do you mean by other modalities? I believe I answered this in the presentation. Other modalities include surgery or other ablative procedures, for instance, photodynamic therapy and such. 13, what is meant by prevention of recurrence, secondary cancer prevention, or do you mean prevention of second primary cancers and survivor populations? Prevention of recurrence can refer to recurrence of a premalignant lesion or a second primary cancer. It generally does not refer to recurrence of the primary cancer as a metastasis. That is within the scope of DC's efforts. Question, for the therapeutic clinical trials requested in attachment 3, what of trials are you looking for? Are you looking for us to demonstrate our capacity to run phase 1-2 trials in general? Are you looking for further examples of investigator-initiated trials, or could use cooperative group in industry-sponsored studies? Therapeutic trials that we ask for refer to phase 0 through 2 trials that demonstrate the site's capability to perform early phase clinical trials. You can use any type of trial you wish that best demonstrates your capabilities. Are biosketches required, recommended for all AOPIs? Yes, required. Question 16. What is scientific leadership? Will this be the AO team plus the AOPIs, or does this include the steering committee? Scientific leadership here refers to the CP-CTNet site, which is the LAO and its AOs, not the steering committee. Question 17. For the research strategy, where do you add references? At the end of each subsection, at the end of the research strategy document, or in the R&R Other Project Information form. References are to be included at the end of each subsection or at the end of the research strategy. Do they count to the 30-page limit? The references should not count to the 30-page limit. They should be in the bibliography and references cited attachment. 18. For attachment 2, should references be included at the end of the sample concept? If so, they count toward the 10-page limit. Just as we discussed regarding the research strategy, the references should not count in the 10-page limit, and they can be placed in the bibliography and references cited attachment. 14. Do we discuss both prevention and therapeutic trials in attachment 1? Answer, yes. The goal of attachment 1 is to provide details about the site's early phase clinical trial capabilities, with main focus being on prevention trials. For applicants who have only performed therapeutic trials, attachment 1 provides an opportunity to illustrate their therapeutic trial capabilities. Sites that perform both prevention and therapeutic trials should describe both types of study. But I want to remind everybody the focus of this RFA is on prevention trials and capabilities to perform early phase prevention trials. Question 2. For attachment 3, you requested that we list, quote, 0, 1, and 2 prevention clinical trials, end of quote. Do you want only cancer prevention clinical trials or all disease prevention clinical trials? The definition of phase 0, 1, and 2 trials include only agent interventions. However, clinicaltrials.gov lists phases for some behavioral interventions. For attachment 3, do you want us to include the clinical trials for cancer prevention behavioral interventions? The answer is we're only interested in cancer prevention clinical trials, and you can include behavioral intervention studies for cancer prevention specifically, not for other disease prevention. 21. For 3, do you want phase 0, 1, and 2 prevention trials that use an investigational agent for smoking cessation? No, cessation is not within the purview of this program. Question 2, for attachment 3, if so or LAO was the lead site of a multi-site study, do you want the overall trial open date, close date, planned accrual, etc., or the site's trial open date, close date, planned accrual, achieved results? Is that the attachment 3 is based on the overall trial. Question 3, for attachment 4 and 5, should this number of participants screened and accrued and accrual rates projected and achieved for each of our AOs separately, or for just those 3 AOs including in attachment 3, for the trial as a whole, even if it included accrual sites that aren't an AO? So the answer is that for attachment 3, list completed and ongoing trials from the AO and up to from the LAO and up to 3 AOs. This would include trials led by the AO, even if the LAO did not oversee the trial. For attachment 4, data should be included for the LAO and each proposed AO, broken down by site within each trial that was listed in attachment 3. AOs that participated in the trials included in attachment 3 should be listed out with the site-specific information in attachment 4. If a site is attributed to a study but is not a proposed AO for this grant, their accrual should not be listed in Attachment 4. That accrual from the sites would be captured as part of the overall trial accrual in Attachment 3. This may be easier to see written down than listening to me say it, but give it a try. Finally, Attachment 5 shows the trial timelines for the studies listed in Attachment 3. Okay, a few more questions and answers. So question number 24, do we need to submit a budget with each sample cancer prevention clinical trial concept? The answer is no. Question 25, if we do not have to submit a budget with each concept, the cost of the first two studies need to be included with the overall budget. So the answer is that the cost of the concepts can be used to inform the overall budget. They do not need to be specifically included. Question 26, in the R subaward budget attachment for, is the R&R subaward budget attachment for required with the application if there are no subawards in the initial budget period? And this has two parts. Read, if a subaward consortium, you must use the subaward form in conjunction with the R&R budget form. And the applicant question is, we do not plan to establish subawards in the initial budget period, although we'll have a consortium and we identified the organizations that will participate with us as AOs. The AOs will participate in trials once the studies have been identified. Do we need to submit subaward budget attachments with the initial application? And part B here is, if we propose AOs in the sample trial concept, do we need to submit the R&R subaward budget attachments form for each of the AO that participates in the sample trials? So it's a complex question, and again, it may be easier to see when it's written out, but I will read it. The cost of clinical trial performance, that's in quotes, in the parent applicant budget should be sufficient to cover all of the costs of the subaward to an AO for their participation in an approved trial. I remember that there is no approved trial in the initial application, just illustrations in Attachment 2. These costs will be restricted in any subsequent notice of award, pending approval from the NCI on specific trials. The recipient is requesting approval for a study. This request should include a budget for the parent award along with any subawards to the participating AOs. Once trial approval is communicated to the recipient, they then have the authority to re-budget into a subaward for the execution of that approved study. And 4, no, a budget for the sample concept should not be submitted in the initial application. If the applicant anticipates requested approval to do one of the sample concepts, should their application be funded, any allowable costs associated with that trial should be included in the cost of clinical trial performance in the parent applicant budget. Simple words needed at this point. That covers the questions that we have gotten previously.
And we haven't received any questions. We have been sitting here, so apparently people got it all out of their system prior to the webinar. So if you have any additional questions, please type them in the box now.
And if you have any questions that maybe are specific names, or if you have them following this webinar, please feel free to reach out to the email address that's currently on your screen and has also been sent via the chat box. We'd be happy to answer your questions following this webinar. Again, please feel free to submit them via the chat or a Q&A panel, but hopefully all the questions that we received in advance did answer a lot of the questions that you have had or were addressed in the presentation given earlier.
And I think for maybe
absolutely.
5 minutes or so, if somebody has questions, we want to emphasize that we will be happy to answer questions subsequently. Any questions that pertain to the actual FOA will be listed on the FQs, and we will try to add those questions in a way that will make it easy for you to see that this is a new question that is being addressed. So we'll have the dates when the FAQs were updated, so you don't have to go through all questions. Again, did I see this before or not?
All right. We're going to fly here now.
Yeah.
Will the CP-CTNet sites do data entry for their trials, or will that be the responsibility of the DMACC?
It'll probably be the CP-CTNet sites.
Okay. So from the budget cap, it seems you are anticipating smaller, cheaper trials than in the present consortia. If cross-consortia trials emerge, will there be an opportunity to expand budget?
So if there are, this only flying by the seat of the pants, as you said, if there are cross-consortia studies, then clearly budgets from both or however many consortia are involved will be involved in supporting such studies. So they may be more robust than single studies. And depending on NCI availability of funds, there are opportunities to add to more specific studies. The other thing is these are the current program where the total budget for the studies came at the same time when we awarded the task order. These studies will occur over multiple years and funding periods, and therefore funds from multiple years can be applied to more robust and expensive studies. The third thing I would like to add is that the markers that will be addressed may need to be prioritized in a more strict fashion than previously. Obviously, the budgets need to cover the primary endpoints and some particularly important secondary endpoints, but the current budgets may not be sufficient to study 15 secondary endpoint biomarkers, and therefore additional funds may need to be obtained, for instance, by institutional resources or grants, types of grants, fund some of these additional biomarkers. I don't necessarily anticipate that these studies will be smaller or cheaper than the types of studies that we have been forming.
Next question. With the establishment of the DMACC, what kind of data management capacity is needed for the LAO?
So the LAO needs to be able to interact with the DMACC to access the database of record and to provide the DMACC with all the regulatory information it needs and so on. So many of the centralized capabilities of the LAO to focus on the support of clinical trials still needs to be there. What's taken out from what the consortia in the previous program used to do is the monitor auditing, which is now entirely a DMACC effort, and also maintaining the database, building the database, the study reporting that requires accessing the database, both for the monthly and ad hoc reports. And do you want to add anything else? The randomization will be a DMACC. No, randomization is going to be a site. Yeah. We're working out the details.
QA, QC is precise.
And quality, the QA, QC is a LAO effort.
Okay, we have a follow-up question about budget. A typical study in the present consortia had a project period of about 2 years. Trials that are projected to run for longer periods
supported?
Be acceptable.
Yes. Okay. Although the project period in many studies was 2 years, most studies have taken longer. Right, have taken longer. So yes. will say that, if you're anticipating a 10-year study, that may not be the right one to submit.
Okay, an additional budget question. Should a patient care complexity model still be developed upfront based on the concept fitted, or will it be needed down the line when a trial is proposed and accepted?
Budget management is really going to be done by the LAO. And so this, I think, one of the biggest changes from our previous contract-funded program is that it will be up to you to manage the patient care costs and other costs.
Okay. Next question is about the QA/QC monitoring and auditing aspect. So essentially, how do you separate QA/QC and monitoring auditing? This is the most confusing aspect.
Well, the auditing that we're referring to is going to the sites or doing it to look at the participant records, the pharmacy, et cetera, regulatory documents. So it's not entering things into the database of records, which requires QA/QC. The auditing is auditing participant charts and sites' performance.
So all the questions that have been entered, we'll give you a couple seconds to see if there are any follow-ups sitting out there in cyberspace.
So we answered these questions verbally. There will be a written, more formal answer to these questions that have been produced now during the webinar, and they will be posted. And we hope to post the answer to the questions in a couple of days.
Okay, so we have a follow-up question. But the data is not viewable for QA/QC if it is going to the DMACC.
The site has
Yes.
their own data.
I mean,
the sites will, and the lead academic sites will have access to the database of records, so they will be able to see the data in the system. So,
For their own data.
For their own.
for their own trials, yes.
All right. And the next one I think is pretty sure. Will LAOs be performing monitoring visits?
No, a DMACC effort. What we try to do is to separate out these these network-wide activities instead of having duplicative efforts at each site, LAO, to separate those out to the DMACC.
But the L can come up with their plan for monitoring, and some
LAOs will have oversight of their
and in
sites.
some cases it might involve on-site, but but that has to fit into their overall budget.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, we think that the DMACC will. Now, we intend for the DMACC to be performing the monitoring or auditing, as it's being called now, and that includes for cause extra audits, and those may need to be coordinated with the LAO if the LAO identifies problems. So we're saying you cannot go on site to an AO if you are an LAO, but the bulk of the activities are going to monitoring and auditing activities will be done by the DMACC.
No question. Will the LAO have access to submit data in real time?
yes.
Okay. That was it. Okay.
With that, again, thank you everyone for all your questions submitted in advance, as well as the questions submitted during the webinar. If you have follow-up questions or your question was not addressed during today's webinar, please feel free to reach out to the email address that is seen on your screen. As a reminder, the recording and the slide set and FAQs from today will be posted online in the near future. That web address is also up on your screen right now. And with that, I'd like to thank our attendees and Dr. Ava Shoba.
And thank you, everybody, and we look forward to your applications.